Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in the far northern Canadian Rockies. So anybody who follows my Instagram page has been seeing me post a lot of stuff about a recent trip that I took to the far northern regions of British Columbia, where I spent a week flying around on little float planes, landing on lakes, 50 to 100 miles off into the middle of nowhere with no roads, and fishing for all kinds of interesting stuff. Rainbow trout, pike, Arctic grayling, bull trout, you name it, we were probably fishing for it. This is a trip that's been a bucket list item for me. I mean, I spend a lot of time in the backcountry down here in Colorado and elsewhere in the lower 48. We just don't have anything like the vast expanses of wilderness that they have in the Muskwa-Kechika up there, or that entire region in the north of British Columbia. And so when I had the opportunity to go and take a trip and do these sort of fly-in fishing outings, I could not say no. And so I did spend a week up there this summer. It was, I don't say this lightly, but it was sort of a life-changing experience. And something that I will never forget. It was a place that spoke to me very deeply. It was an experience that I think that I will carry with me for the rest of my life and all the fishing trips to come. And it was something that was made possible specifically by Northern Rockies Adventures, which is a family of pilots and fishing guides and folks who just know this area like the back of their hand and have made it their business to help people get up there and experience the just wild, incredible, untamed nature of the fisheries in Northern Canada. So today we're going to be talking to Urs and Daniel Schildknecht. I'm sure I said it wrong. They have a little bit of an accent that I can't quite emulate, but they'll correct us here. Urs has been flying bush planes for 50 years, far longer than I've been alive. Daniel also flies and is a fly fishing guide and somebody that I had the pleasure of fishing with when I was up there. And they're here to talk to us today about their business, about their guide services, their experience as bush pilots, and what it's like to fish in the far northern Canadian Rockies, as well as how you can sign up for a trip like that if you were so inclined. And man, if you've got the time and the space to do it, it's definitely something that I would recommend because it's really a special thing. So they're here with us today. I think you're going to enjoy the interview. It's something different than what you probably hear about backcountry fly fishing down here in the States. And I think we're going to have a really good time learning all about fishing up there in Canada. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so our guests today are Urs and Daniel. I'm going to try to say it. Schildknecht, and they're going to tell me I'm wrong because I can't do the proper accent here in a second, but they are with Northern Rockies Adventures up in British Columbia, way up north in Canada. Those of you who follow Instagram and the podcast know that I spent a week up there with these guys flying around in crazy float planes, catching pike and grayling and trout, and just generally having a completely ridiculous amount of fun up in the backcountry of Canada doing something that I have never done before. So these are the guys who made that happen, and as it happens, they are the ones who do it every single day, and I thought it would be good to get them on the podcast to talk about a version of backcountry fly fishing that a lot of us down here in the States just really don't get to experience very often. So Urs and Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. It was a lot of fun fishing with you, so let's chat fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, why don't we start with this? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about Northern Rockies Adventures. Tell us about the business, because you've built quite an empire for yourself up there and are doing some really cool stuff. So maybe you can give us the quick background on the business and the story of how the business came to be.
I think that's a good one for Dad. Yeah.
Okay, as you probably can tell from my accent, my wife Marion and I, we are originally from Switzerland. We migrated to Canada in 1979 and started the air service, the flying business in the Northwest Territories, 100 miles to the northeast of Mancho Lake in 1981. We started to develop that flying fishing shortly thereafter, and basically have been fishing the Northern Rocky Mountains for well over 40 years now. And the area is totally inaccessible, and you need the float planes to get into the backcountry. My passion is the flying and the fishing, and that's how we really got going. And we have a tremendous area up here, which harbors some of the best untouched fishing in North America.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say that, so when Urs says that it's inaccessible, he means it. The Muskwa-Kechika, which is the area where these guys are located, is 16 million acres of nothing, just wilderness, which is far larger than almost anything else in the U.S. There might be a couple that are close to it, but not by much. And there are no roads. There are no roads. There are really no highways except for the Alaska-Canada highway that goes between, obviously, Alaska and Canada. And the only way to get anywhere is on float plains. And so there are just thousands and thousands of lakes sort of dotted all over the place, or at least that's what it looks like from the air. And these guys specialize in getting you into these places, which are, as Urs mentioned, otherwise not able to be accessed any other way, which is pretty wild and pretty special. It's not something that we see down here very often. And I think one of the coolest things about Northern Rockies Adventures was it's a family operation. So Urs has been flying for a long time. And Urs, I want to talk more about your background here in a little bit because I think it's pretty incredible. But Daniel is his son. And Daniel, I'd like you to introduce yourself here in just a second. But he flies and acts as a fishing guide and does a whole bunch of other stuff with the lodge. And then there is yet another son who also flies and does all this stuff. And it's quite a family affair, which is really, it's pretty cool. And at least speaking from my perspective, when I was up there, that sort of family focus and the way that you have built what you do up there around all of you kind of as a team is pretty special. So maybe you could touch on that a bit.
Yes, you're quite right. We are very fortunate that both of our boys, Daniel and Michael, are starting to take over the business. Obviously, having started in 1981, I'm getting up in age, and it's time for the next generation to step up. And it's a pleasure working as a family, running the lodge and doing the fly-in together.
So Daniel, tell me about how you got involved in flying. Was it, I mean, your dad's been flying for, how long has it been, Urs?
Well, I got my pilot's license. Actually, it's an anniversary this month. It's 50 years ago. I started to fly in Switzerland. I did an apprenticeship as a machinist, got my pilot's license during my apprenticeship, and got the license just before I turned 18. In Switzerland, it's kind of funny. You can get your pilot's license before you are 18, but you couldn't get your driver's license before 18. And so my mom tells me that the first word I spoke as a kid was basically airplane, because I think I was always fascinated with aviation and started with building model airplanes in my early teens and then got into the private pilot's license and so on. And I've been very lucky to spend all my life doing what I really love doing, which is flying small airplanes.
Daniel, do you feel like you got the same bug?
You know, I'll be honest. I think I don't have half the bucket, Dad, when it comes to flying. For me, the airplanes are a means of getting into this beautiful backcountry. I think my connection to aviation is growing up in this country, and to fly with an airplane into the backcountry, into the woods, and go fish for wild and native fish. That's what gets me hooked, and that's why I love hopping in the planes too. I love flying them. They're a lot of fun. I think Dad loves airplanes for airplanes. I love airplanes. Well, I love the airplanes, but I also love where I can go with them.
That makes sense. And so the first time we got on one of these float planes, we come in, we stayed in these really nice kind of cabins down by Muncho Lake, and the planes are parked right out front. I actually got to tie flies on the desk looking out at the float plane in the evenings, which was pretty incredible. And we go out there, and I mean, watching you two, and then when Michael was flying too, hopping the planes, I mean, it's like, it reminds me of the way that I guess an average person would just hop in their car and drive to work. I mean, you're jumping in there. Daniel, I saw you flying in sandals a couple of times. Urs, everything is just pure muscle memory. It's pretty incredible how much time you spend in those planes, to be honest with you. And it's just something that we don't see very often. And I think, whether you're coming at it from the perspective of really loving flying, and Urs, I want to talk a little bit more about your history on that front, or just loving to get into the backcountry, it's pretty obvious that you both are really incredible pilots, which I was thankful for because we're flying over mountains that look like they might kill you if you were not really incredible pilots. So I'm grateful for the skill.
That there's something interesting about this bush flying that we do up here, and there's a reason there isn't, many that do it anymore, because the advent of the helicopter and, the jet plane, a lot of these kind of remote communities in Canada have turned into small towns and everyone kind of congregates. But bush flying as what, Dad does and, what we're doing nowadays is really, really become more of a tourism thing. We have this backcountry access and the float plane is really the only way to get there. And in the past, bush pilots were flying around there delivering mail and flying hospital goods and even supply runs. And that era has changed, but kind of what we're doing here is probably a little bit of, the last refuge of bush flying, and I think that's kind of pretty special in its own right. But yeah, you don't usually picture a pilot showing up in sandals or hip waders for that matter.
Yeah, but you get off the plane and then you're fishing. I mean, the crazy thing is they'll fly you in, they take off from the lake, they fly you over the mountains, you land on another lake. They literally back the plane up just like you would park a car in a parking lot. And then you're unloading boats, and about 10 minutes after we land, you've got a boat running with a bunch of guys throwing flies at all kinds of different species of fish. So it's pretty wild to see people switch between expertise that way. I mean, I think a lot of people assume you have pilots and you have fishing guides, but you rarely see pilots who are also fishing guides, and that's pretty wild.
Yeah, we keep it pretty small. We have a maximum of the capacity really would be 13 guests a week. That's what two float planes can carry. We operate the Havilland Turbine Single Otter, which is a great airplane. It can carry up to 9 passengers. And the Caravan we have here, we take 6 guests along and their gear for the daily fly-out trips. And both airplanes are equipped with turboprop engines. And you mentioned you can back them up, and that's really unusual that you can actually back up an airplane and park it on a beach in the backcountry and kind of step off the back of the floats and go fishing right there.
Is that not how they usually work?
Well, thanks to the turbine, yes, you can reverse the thrust on the propeller to the point that it pushes the airplane back. I mean, they are not really designed for that, but you can do it, yes.
They're not really designed for it, but we make them do it. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about this kind of bush pilot community up there, because one of the cool things for me was, we're flying around. Obviously, our group is out there to go fish for the week. But while we were there, the very first lake that we went out to, you flew us in, or I think I rode with Michael. We landed on the lake. We go to the beach. I hop off the plane, and there's like an 8-year-old standing there in the bushes in camo, and he says, "Hi." I'm sort of, jump because I don't expect to see an 8-year-old out in the 50 miles in the wilderness. And he and his dad were out there to go sheep hunting, and they were talking about the pilot that flew them in. And Urs, I think you asked, or maybe Michael asked, well, how's he doing? I said, oh, he's doing great. I'll tell him I said hi. And throughout the week, there was a lot of that. There was, I think, a time where you flew up to pick up a group of women who had done a long backpacking trip to a lake and needed a ride back. I think Michael mentioned doing some type of an emergency flight because somebody had broken an ankle. And it's really kind of it's an interesting community because the whole universe around this wilderness kind of centers around you guys as the pilots. And I know, it may be different than it used to be. And I understand that it may be sort of one of the last bastions of being a bush pilot, but it seems like it's pretty integral to what's going on in that wilderness there. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that. How many pilots are there and what's that community like?
That's a very good question, and yes, I can elaborate a little bit further. When I first started in 1981, it was basically flying the natives around. They had their camps in the backcountry. They were out there trapping furs, animals, and they made a living with that. And then by about 1983 or so, that came to an end. Women weren't really able to wear fur coats anymore. So those people lost their income, really, the natives up here, which I think was really bad. And sometimes we don't think about the results which those groups down south push. And yet many of those trap lines were in the natives' families for generations. And I usually flew them out with the ski plane in January. They brought their fur back into town, traded them off, and then flew them back out again. While nowadays it's all basically tourism related, as Daniel mentioned earlier. It's fishing, it's hunting, and the bush pilots up here basically provide the lifeline and the transportation into the backcountry for those groups of people.
Nowadays it like I mentioned, it's shifted more into tourism. But I think when Dad started, it wasn't just flying the First Nations out. The fur trade was one part of a job giver for bush pilots. So back I think when Dad started, there was probably multiple dozens of bush pilots in Fort Nelson alone, flying in from Fort Ware, flying in from Dease Lake. Even as I was growing up, there was 3 or 4 different float planes kind of in the Muncho Lake area and out of Liard. Now we're really one of the last ones doing it. There really isn't much left. I think that community of bush pilots has gone down from, a dozen to maybe like six that fly in the area here. So it's a tight knit community. The guys that do it for a living and long term, it's a passion. They don't want to be flying airliners. They don't want to be flying straight lines across large distances. They love the backcountry probably as much as the people that they fly into the backcountry to experience, the outdoors. So it's a very close group now. While in the past it was a stepping stone for people into the airlines. They would, get thrown into a small airplane in the woods and probably do the most challenging flying of their careers, and then they would get a shot at flying, for an airline. But nowadays it's very different. It's kind of the people that are passionate about being in the outdoors and flying small airplanes that are still doing it.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about sort of how often you guys are in the air, because I mean, it seems like you were flying virtually every day between the fishing and the hunting and whatever else you have going on.
That's actually quite true. We basically fly from Monday through Saturday, and unfortunately there is now flight duty time regulations that doesn't allow us to fly on Sundays. So it works actually fairly good. Sundays our changeover day on the fishing trips, and so we don't really put too terribly many hours on. We basically fly in the morning to a remote lake or stream that may take half an hour to 45 minutes, soaring over the most reaches of the Rocky Mountains to a remote location. We fish there for the day together, have either shore lunch or take a sandwich along, and then fly back in the evening. So from an actual flying point of view, the hours are not very much. It's just we spent the whole day out there and enjoyed the fishing together.
Yeah, and I think, those flights are really something. I mean, the first time we got on those planes, I mean, I guess I didn't know exactly what I expected, but I mean, you're flying, maybe 400 or 500 feet above some of these mountains?
Yeah, well, we try to be at least 500 feet, but sometimes if there is a low cloud cover or so, then we may have the minimum we are allowed to fly is 300 feet above the ground here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's cool. I mean, it's hard to measure with your eyeballs, right? Especially if you're not a pilot. But I mean, it's close enough that you can see individual rocks and the
Yeah,
landscape.
you can see the animals, and it's pretty special. But yeah, we try to. It always looks closer than it is, but they are pretty impressive peaks. That said, the Rockies up here are not as high as what you have down in Colorado. We're looking at 7 to 8,000 feet, as opposed to some of the tens and above that you have.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have some. I mean, I was up at 12,000 feet this week hiking, and there are a few. Obviously, we've got 14ers down here that folks love to get on and hike. But I will say the mountains that you have there, especially flying over them, first of all, they go horizon to horizon. I mean, the landscape is it's incredible how vast it is. And in fact, the first time I called home and, what's it like? How is it? What do you think? Tell me about it. And it's one of the first times in my life, I'm a wordy guy in general, and I could not come up with the right word to describe just the scale of the place. Because you're flying over these peaks, and I mean, there are just thousands of creeks and river valleys and, massive drainages and smaller drainages, lakes everywhere, mountains as far as the eye can see. I mean, it is truly spectacular in a way that defies description. So I hear you. We may have taller mountains down here, but, having spent a good chunk of my life and many, many thousands of days of my life, I have never seen anything like that before. And I doubt I ever will again, to be honest. So, I mean, for me, it's like we're flying over this crazy landscape, which is unlike anything I've ever seen before. But you see it every day. Does it ever wear off, or is it wild every time you get up there?
It doesn't wear off on me. I just love it every day to fly and soar over those mountains. It's an incredible scenery. We are at the northernmost ranges of the Rocky Mountain chain. We have the Rocky Mountain Trench. It's basically a fault line running from the Yukon all the way down to Washington State. And on the other side of the Rocky Mountain Trench, you get into the Cassiar Mountains, which is a different rock formation again. Those mountains are even more rugged. And so we basically operate within a 100-mile radius of the lodge.
I don't find it gets old either. I'm always looking out the window trying to see another fishing spot or, just the scenery is, looking out for animals, or just taking in all those beautiful mountains. I think you'd have to be pretty jaded for it to get old or boring to see such wonderful landscape. I always think, I spend a lot of my winters in the city. How few people get to see such a vast untouched landscape, and it's pretty special to make that. Dad calls it his office, and it is pretty unique.
Yeah, I mean, we flew over those Cassiar Mountains, I think on day 2, and it's funny because the main sort of Rockies in the area around Muncho Lake are, they're beautiful and they're obviously rugged and untouched, but they're a little bit more, placid or inviting. And then the Cassiars are like something out of Lord of the Rings. I mean, they're these massive, jagged, black mountains. I mean, it is a crazy landscape that I think, to be honest with you, most people who spend most of their lives in the city or maybe driving 30 minutes out of the city wouldn't even believe existed. So the fact that you see that every single day is pretty incredible. I'm jealous, to say the least.
Well, I was happy to be able to show you what we have up here in the Northern Rockies and in Northern BC, British Columbia in general.
Yeah, so Urs, maybe you could tell us a little bit about just your history as a pilot. I mean, you said earlier you're coming up on 50 years as a pilot, which is insane, right? And you're still, I really can't say enough about Urs as a pilot. I mean, we had one day where we flew back in a thunderstorm, and watching this guy try to sort of find the holes and find the pockets and find the valleys and navigate like it was no big deal. It was a crazy thing to watch, and it's something that I think only comes with many decades of experience. And Urs, I know that, you've obviously been in British Columbia for a long time, but you've got a long history flying even before that. And maybe you can kind of let us know how the legend was born, because you are kind of a legend up there. I knew who you were even before I booked this trip, believe it or not. So tell us about how you became you.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I'm happy to talk about it, and I don't think I'm a legend. I just love what I'm doing up here. And again, I started in Switzerland as a young, in my late teens. I got my pilot's license just before I turned 18. And kind of a funny story. The first foreign trip we made out of Switzerland, we went to the Oktoberfest in Munich. And of course, I was a prime candidate to fly the airplane because I don't drink. So my buddies had a good time. And we landed on that airport just outside of Munich, on a small general aviation airport. And there was a big Bavarian guy on the tower, and he chewed us out because we didn't do the circuit properly. Anyhow, he got past that, and then he looks at me and asked me how old I would be. And I said, well, I'm going to turn 18 in a few weeks. And then the thunder just started again, because apparently in Germany in those days you couldn't get your pilot's license or couldn't even start flying till you turned 18. And here is the Swiss guy showing up. But, I mean, he didn't see on my license that I wouldn't be allowed to fly to Germany. We got past it. We had a great trip. And in order to gain flying experience, one of the trips, my wife or my girlfriend on those days, Marianne, we rented a Cessna 150 in Florida, and it was cheaper in those days to rent an airplane in the States for 100 flying hours, which I needed to get my first job. And we flew that around the States. We flew from Florida to California, up the West Coast, Oregon coast, which was beautiful, up into Vancouver and all across Canada and down to Florida again. And that gave me the flying experience and flying hours. And I got my first job flying for an oil company in the Libyan desert. So I flew a Pilatus turboporter, which is about the same size as or slightly smaller than the turbine Otter I fly nowadays. And so I worked there for 2 years. We saved enough money that we could start our own business back in 1981 in the Northwest Territories, not too far from Muncho Lake, roughly 100 miles away. And from there, we just worked our way up. We got to know the fellow which was operating that lodge at Muncho Lake on the Alaska Highway at mile 462 in Muncho Lake Provincial Park. And that fellow told me people always want to go fishing, but on a spur of a moment, of course, it's usually too expensive if you just want to fly in for a day. So we started to develop those week-long packages. And the lodge was actually for sale. They wanted to get rid of it. So Marian and I really stretched ourselves, and we ended up buying that lodge in the winter of 88, 89. And have been building it up ever since. And we are very fortunate that we have had a very loyal clientele for many years flying with us and coming fishing up here.
Well, many decades. I think we have a couple guys that are going in 25 consecutive years of fishing, so it's a tough one to beat there, Ross.
Yeah, it's an incredible place and a pretty incredible story. And I think, that region, we don't have to get too far into it here, but just the way that I imagine it probably changed with the completion of the highway there, which, previously there were very few ways to really get up there that weren't flying in on a plane. It's very interesting to see how the region has changed. And Daniel, to your point earlier, how a lot of it has shifted from sort of backwoods industry like trapping or hunting to really tourism, right? You got people driving up and down the highway with, campers on the back, just touring up there, which I know has got to be a change from, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Alaska highway is all paved now, and it's kind of an interesting story. Until about 15, 20 years ago, we heard every day that people mentioned, I was stationed up here, I built the highway back in 1942. We have to keep in mind there was just nothing up here. It was totally inaccessible, and with that highway, there's still no side roads going off it. It just gives you access to certain points, such as Fort Nelson, the major town where we fly to from Vancouver with our King Air. There are those major airports, which also are leftovers from the wartime effort. And from there, you basically need the floor plane to get into the backcountry.
I think what's kind of unique about the geography, though, of what we fish, like, the Alaska Highway, yes, is kind of the lifeline that runs through it, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And I think you kind of got to see that flying into the backcountry. What's really unique about the MK and the Cassiar and the Rockies is the continental divide that runs throughout those two mountain ranges and interweaves between them. And that allows us to have this fishery that we have. If it wasn't for that continental divide, we probably wouldn't have much in rainbows. If it wasn't for the eastern side of the continental divide, we wouldn't probably have the grayling fishing. We're sort of on the extreme ends of both of them. And I think that also is beneficial for some of the species that we get, that we really get some big trophy specimens because they're at the farthest reaches of the grayling, for example, are kind of in their southern reaches for us. So they get to be the biggest grayling, I think, out there. And then for the rainbows, being on the western slope, on the kind of eastern furthest slope of them as well, I think they feed really well up here in these mountains. There, of course, is zero pressure on them, so we get some really nice specimens on both. And the pike fishing too. It's just the variety of species, it's astounding, but it's really actually enabled by the geography.
Yeah, so you could probably tell Daniel's a pretty fishy dude. I had the pleasure of being in his boat for a couple of days, and you always kind of know the guys who really, really care about the ecology of fishing and what fly fishing is and the places where they fish and understanding why the fish are the way they are and sort of your typical guide, right? No disrespect to the typical guide, but a lot of them it's like a Disneyland ride, throw this fly in this place and you'll catch this fish that we caught last week and a million other things. But, it's always clear, Daniel, when I was up there that you've really taken the time to understand that area and the fishery itself. And I wonder if maybe you could talk a bit about sort of how you discover these places, right? I mean, I think you said that you fly to 70 some odd lakes. How do you learn a fishery that size? Or how do you sort of get comfortable enough with it to guide in a place like that?
I would be honored to answer that, but I think that's a dad question. This is 4 decades in the making of narrowing down all these fishing spots. You mentioned earlier you see thousands of lakes and water, and that's true. There is tons of water out here, but to narrow it down to what fishes well, that's really, Dad and his experience. That's 4 decades of doing that. So I think you should tell some of the stories of how you came across some of these places there, Dad.
Well, I mean, of course, having flown for so many years up here, especially in the early days, I occasionally had jobs to fly let's say, fuel drums out for a helicopter outfit. So I unloaded the fuel drums on a remote lake and then made a few casts and got to know that lake that way. Many of our hunting guests, which come up and fly in, BC resident hunters, have told me over the years how the fishing was in some of those lakes. And then, of course, I also just tried some out on my own and kind of got to know the lakes and what's available. And we have a huge area, and we have 70 lakes in our permit within a 100-mile radius of the lodge, basically what we can fly to within an hour's reach. And that gives us almost unlimited access to fisheries, which we touched on it earlier, being right at the continental divide between the Pacific drainage and Arctic drainage is very unique. The majority of our area actually drains north into the Arctic Ocean. That's why we have a completely different fish population than down south. We have rainbow trout, we have Arctic grayling, lake trout, bull trout, and especially with northern pike is becoming more and more popular with the fly fishing. We have crystal clear mountain lakes up here. We were just out yesterday pike fishing again on the fly, and it's just incredible seeing those pike following your fly in and actually taking the bait. It's very unique, and more fly fishermen which come up here for the rainbow trout and grayling fishing, they want to make sure that they have 1 or 2 days a week where they can experience something which they don't really experience anywhere else.
I think, to the kind of discovering the fisheries, now kind of taking over from Dad, there's some with so many different fishing spots. We kind of rotate them in and out throughout the season and the species that we're fishing. So I think my project has been and is an ongoing project is tracking the hatches, tracking, the water levels and the conditions, because we're starting to, with so much water to cover and so many species to fish, we get a lot of guests that are starting to, hone in on a target species. I like to say pick 2 to 3 just so that, you can cover a lot of stuff. And in finding those ideal windows, when's the best time to get a big bull trout and where? And that's been a lot of fun, honing in on that and, fishing these different watersheds. It's amazing how you fly across, we call it the Rocky Mountain Trench, the divide between the Cassiar and the Rockies. You just hop over and all of a sudden the conditions are different. And yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle and you're kind of always putting it together, but there are definitely a lot of tried and true places that deliver some awesome fishing, and it's fun, the versatility of what we get to do.
Yeah, the variety is incredible. I mean, I think day one we went out and we caught a bunch of rainbow trout. The next day we were out looking for bull trout and some more rainbows. And then we had 2 days of pike fishing that were just electric. I mean, I love fly fishing for pike, but the pike lakes that you had us on, the first one was this, if you could come up with a textbook pike lake with these sort of deep, thick weed beds and warmer water and ambush spots, I just don't think you could have come up with a better lake than that one. It was incredible. And we caught, a ton, close to 20, I think. Cooked some of them on the shore, which was amazing. They tasted incredible. It was actually my first time really eating pike properly, and Urs was kind enough to show me how to fillet those things without getting a bunch of bones in your teeth. And then the next day we hopped back on the plane and we went to a different lake that was crystal clear and this crazy turquoise blue. And we were sight fishing for these enormous pike, almost the same way that you would fish a saltwater flat. I mean, it was really a pretty wild experience. And I gotta assume, Daniel and Urs, that, with that much variety in water and species, because it's not just that you have pike here and grayling here and rainbow here, the lakes are astonishingly different from one another, and the streams are astonishingly different from one another. And the fact that you have managed to build the knowledge that you need to guide successfully and put people on fish, 60, 70 miles off into the bush is pretty incredible. And I think a testament to how long you guys have been doing it and the respect that you have for the area up there. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the actual trips that you do. Obviously, I can speak to my experience, but you guys do this week in, week out. So tell me about sort of how these fishing trips go. How many people are there? How does it work? How do people get there? Just walk me through a week of fishing in British Columbia.
Yeah, so that's the biggest change over the last couple of years. So, I don't want to say pandemic, but with that, the airlines really collapsed in these smaller towns like Fort Nelson. So we were kind of at the verge of, we had fishing guests that wanted to come, but not really a way to get them up. And being in aviation, and dad's probably quick to pick up another airplane anyway. We figured, we're gonna take matters into our own hands. So we do a all-inclusive trip from Vancouver now. We have a King Air that we purchased to fly our guests up from Vancouver, and that just makes for an easy connection. Not relying on small regional carriers. We deal with the international airlines out of Vancouver International. We pick our guests up at the hotels, usually around the international. Drive them out to Pitt Meadows on Sunday morning. Fly them up to the lodge, to Fort Nelson. Pick them up, drive up to the lodge, and then from there you either fish doing 4 flyouts or 6 flyouts. If you do 4 flyouts, there's some local fishing to be done here too, which is really nice. It's more kind of drive-in fishing. And then if you do the 6, every day you fly out, you probably are seeing something different, unless you would like to go see the same water again. It's a lot of fun, the variety of fishing. We always recommend people to kind of pick their target species or style of fishing that they'd like to do, because it really helps to kind of narrow down what fishing weeks they want to do. And like that, we kind of know what to recommend. We also we do a maximum of, depending on the week, 9 to 14 kind of fishing guests. We can do a lot of trips with spouses where there's a non-fishing trip as well that's very active, from hiking to canoeing to visiting Virginia Falls up in the Nahanni. So there's a whole kind of accompanying package to it, but a lot of people do come up for the fishing. So the trip then wraps up on Sunday, and we do everything in reverse. We have you back in Vancouver by kind of 3 o'clock, so you can connect with the flight after 6 p.m. heading home. So if you live in the West Coast, we've just brought the Rockies a lot closer than ever before.
And how often do you do it? Like, how much of the year are you running these trips for?
It's really from basically first week in June till mid-September. We can sometimes do a little bit earlier at the end of May, but for fly fishing, the core of it is kind of the last week in June until mid-September. To go much later on the fly, it almost gets pretty windy mid-September on. Pike fishing's pretty good, but things start freezing here actually in October even.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I think, Urs, when we were setting this up, you told me that you were already starting to see some of the leaves change up there, and it's only really the end of August at this point. So I imagine fall can set in pretty early.
Yeah, it's a beautiful time of the year right now. You see the alpine meadows turning slightly yellow. We were just up rainbow trout fishing a few days ago, and yes, we were all commenting. We have beautiful weather right now. We have daytime highs. Yesterday it was 80 degrees on the lake where we went pike fishing. It's probably the warmest time of the year right now, but the nights are getting cooler, and pretty soon we get frost overnight, which is quite normal. But I really like the fall time with the pike fishing, and some of the rainbows are at their peak, and especially the graylings. The graylings, I think, if somebody wants to fish for graylings, you should come up mid-July through early September.
Yeah, I think something to mention about the trip that I was surprised with, to be honest. I mean, I'm used to, when I go somewhere that's kind of wilderness or backcountry, I have a backpack, I have a tent. If I'm lucky, I might stay in like a really shitty motel somewhere, but I'm roughing it most of the time, especially in those areas. But it's easy to forget how far away from civilization you're going because you guys have it set up to run so smoothly. So, like Daniel mentioned, you fly into Vancouver. Somebody picks you up from your hotel. They drive you to a regional airport there. They load you onto a plane that, as Urs mentioned, they actually own. Fly you 1,000 miles-ish across the mountains up to Fort Nelson, and they load you on another shuttle. They take you out to Muncho Lake, which is, I don't know, probably a 300-mile drive. And everything is just sort of is there for you. So, yeah, you're getting on the plane and you're flying further into the wilderness than I would be willing to bet just about anybody in the lower 48, at least, has ever been. But, in the morning you get up, you have an awesome breakfast. You come back in the evenings and you have, in my case, a couple of old fashions and some really incredible food. And then you get to go sleep in a really comfortable cabin right next to this incredible blue, clear lake where the lodge is located. And that kind of contrast between being off in the bush, in the middle of nowhere, but also having the comfort, frankly, and the routine of the lodge and the trip that you guys have built around the fishing itself is really pretty incredible. It was a pleasant surprise for me, and it was nice to come back and eat schnitzel instead of freeze-dried macaroni. It was pretty good.
Yeah. The comfort thing is pretty important to a lot of our guests. I think, fly fishing is, you get multiple different generations, but we have found that as the years have progressed, the comfort has been really important. I think when Dad built this lodge in the 90s, the idea was to have a higher level of comfort for fishing guests. It's not uncommon, unfortunately, in the industry to do a backcountry trip and you're going to be compromising a lot of creature comforts, and we don't, we want to offer both. We're seeing a lot more couples nowadays go on a fishing trip, and if you're willing to tough the outdoors, that doesn't always mean your spouse is, and it sure is nice to be able to offer that for both parties, and it makes for a great time.
That's something which I really seen have changed over the last 40 some years, where I have been offering those trips. In the past, it usually just was a guy's trip to go fishing, but now we basically don't have a week anymore where not some women are in the group and the guys bring their wives along, and most of the time they are great fisher persons too, but some of them also just enjoy the scenery. They go to the hot springs. We have some natural hot springs nearby. Daniel mentioned Virginia Falls, Canada's first natural World Heritage Site, so we do day trips for the non-fishing guests to take them up there, and so there's lots of things and to do and look at other things than just the fishing, which is great up here.
And we think it makes the fishing trip probably better. It kind of enhances it. So yeah, no, it's something we're always working on, and I like that balance too. Being out in the woods that's wild and rugged, and then coming back and sleeping on a feather pillow with a duvet as opposed to huddling up in a sleeping bag, which is, fun for its own. But, you do it a week or you do it all summer long like we do. It is nice to be able to have all those comforts.
Yeah, having a home base definitely helps. And I think to some extent it might be kind of overwhelming if you didn't, just because you're flying out on these planes and you're in the middle of nowhere, and having sort of a home base is a huge plus. I really enjoyed it. On top of the fact that the food is awesome, and the drinks for that matter. So it's good stuff. All right. Well, so if somebody wanted to come up there and spend a week with you all, how would they go about doing that? Where do they find you? How do they get something like this booked?
The best way is our website. They'll probably be in contact with me pretty quick from there. The website is nradventures.com. So that's Northern Rockies Adventures.com. There's, contact us, connect with us, all there. Otherwise, my email is daniel@nradventures.com. That's an S at the end of Adventures. That's our company name. You can also phone us at 250-776-3481. Like that, you reach the lodge and you can talk fishing. And whenever you're kind of planning this trip, I always recommend to, let us know the fishing you're looking to do, what species you want to fish for, because the seasons do vary quite quickly up here. I say there's usually about a two-week window, that where things kind of shift and change. You get on most of the species, for a month at a time, or some longer than others. But it really helps to know kind of what you want to fish for, and then we help. We recommend the dates from there.
We kind of started out about talking about the season in early June. The ice usually breaks up here on the mountain lakes by the third week in May. so that we have the mountain runoff. Of course, the rivers are relatively high at that time, not really ideal for fly fishing. So in early June, we do spin casting, and then by the third week of June, those mountain streams, they clear up actually in a hurry, and you get those fish being really active. They are starting to, on the rainbow trouts, they are starting to spawn. On the pike, they just got off the spawn. Walleyes are done spawning as well. And so we're going to look at the seasons a little bit, and then we really start with the fly fishing around the 20th of June through mid-September. But then there is certain variations. If you are after a bull trout or are you after a rainbow trout, you want to fish the rivers, you would like to fish still water.
Or more dries. We like to really kind of help kind of find that spot that, make that trip happen the way you want it, right? It's never a guarantee because you're dealing with the weather and everything, but generally you can read the patterns over the decades up here as to what works and the fishing that is best for what. So it's a really unique kind of thing like that as well. And there are times where you can catch all 6 species. You can walleye, pike, bull trout, lake trout, grayling, rainbows. You can catch them all on the fly. It's just going to be a short window. It's generally kind of the end of June. To get really good dry fly fishing, that's generally mid-July into early August. Those are kind of when the big green drake hatches are. We got some nice stoneflies coming off the water then, but it really kind of plays a little bit. What do you want to catch? What kind of fishing would you like to do? And then we take it from there for you.
Yeah, and it's a trip of a lifetime. And I don't, a lot of people throw those words around. They don't really mean a lot, but I wouldn't vouch for it if I hadn't had an incredible time. It's something that was a bucket list item for me and something that I will remember for the rest of my life. So thank you guys for making it really, really special. And I hope if anybody is listening has got that same item on their bucket list, give these guys a call because they really do make it about as easy as they possibly can to get you off into some of the most pristine wilderness on the continent. And it is a really, really incredible time and definitely worth it if that's the thing that you're into. So guys, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And probably have to get back up there and see you again one of these days.
Yeah.
Okay, Ross. It was a pleasure having you up here, and thanks a lot for your friendship and all your help.
It was great chatting with you, Ross. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. All right, so we've been talking to Urs and Daniel with Northern Rockies Adventures up in British Columbia. As you can tell, these are guys who have spent an awful lot of their lives in some of the most untamed, large-scale wilderness on the North American continent. And they have managed to put together an experience up there that is both wild and just astonishingly vast as far as your ability to access these far-off places, but also accessible enough that you don't have to be a crazy hardcore backcountry angler to get up there and enjoy it and to really experience the majesty of that place. I just don't know of another word to attach to it. It really does defy description. So they're doing great work. I had an incredible time up there with them. It's been a lot of fun chatting with them about their business and what they do on a day-to-day basis and what it's like to live and fish in a place like the Muskwa-Kechika. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I hope if you have any interest in taking a trip like this, you will give them a shout. I know they'd be happy to walk you through how all of that works and get you going. And in the meantime, I hope you're getting out there and slaying some fish for these last few weeks of summer before we start shifting over into fall backcountry fly fishing. So take care of yourselves, guys, and I'll see you back here next week. Until next time, this is Ross. Maybe I'll see you out there. Just watch your step when you're getting off the float plane.